I've got a, I'm not trying to defend liberals today in any sense, but I'm a little disturbed. A story that I heard about on Fox News before I left the house this morning, and I just was reading about it online. There was a liberal activist, and he worked for was it a think tank in Chicago? And he had a nasty comment he made about the grieving widow the other night, who Donald Trump recognized during the president's joint address to Congress, or to a joint session of Congress. And the liberals immediately, Michael Moore and some of the other, worst case scenario people on the American left, they were making fun of her. They were making fun of President Trump. They were claiming she was being used. Some people said she was too stupid to realize she was being used. I don't think she feels that way at all. And then when the widow of the American sniper came out in her defense over the last couple of days, it started. These people were backpedaling. Well, former Navy SEAL complained to the company that employed one of these critics, and I think the guy's name was Grillo. He got fired for having an opinion. Now, it may have been a stupid opinion, but he's still allowed in this country any longer. You get fired for having it. I get paid for opinions. And what really galls me is in the time that I have been paid to give opinions, and that goes back to I moved, I was doing some talk radio as a weekend gig in the middle of the 1990s, but I didn't give out a lot of opinions. I was just a news guy who was filling in on weekends. When I started doing opinion radio in January of 2004, I immediately decided, I'm here to give opinions. I'm going to give them. I've been fired twice now for giving opinions, suspended once for a week for giving opinions. Why do they hire me then if somebody didn't like it, and so therefore, usually it's connected to somebody who waves some dollars in front of somebody, and that's the part I don't like about how this always works. But this guy got fired. Was he wrong-headed and mean-spirited? Yes. But to be fired from your job, did it have anything to do with what he does at the office? Probably not. And I've never been big on, we'll have a boycott, or we'll do this and that, or we'll demand that. There are people, I read their newspaper columns, who I know are flaming liberals, and I read the columns and I'm just so angry. I'd like to shout at them. But you know what? They probably feel the same way about me. And the reason that you have people who write newspaper columns and editorials or opinionate on the radio is because there's a market for it. And we're not alone. We're not alone. A lot of people think like we do. That's why we do this. And so when I see people getting fired just because they said something somebody else didn't agree with, I'm sorry, but we lose the spirit of America when we do that. Coming up on 9:37, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And we're at 30, on our way likely into the, I would suspect, mid-40s. It was nice yesterday in the sense that it's not, you can't still go out and walk around a lot in just short-sleeve shirts. But if it's not windy lately, that's a good sign. I had friends back east who were telling me that the wind was so bad they were losing shingles, and antennas were getting knocked down and trees knocked down, and some places in the center of the country had some pretty nasty tornadoes the last few days. So when it's 46 here and it's sunny and warm and there's not much of a breeze, I can live with that. This comes from the Daily Signal. Aaron and Melissa Klein, these are the people from the Oregon Bakery who have been fined $135,000 because they wouldn't bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. I've read pastors out there who try to say, well, they should have. But that's also an opinion, because a lot of pastors out there say if they believe that the Bible tells them that they shouldn't participate in something like this because the Bible tells them it's an abomination, then they should be allowed under the First Amendment. There are 5 liberties guaranteed in the First Amendment. One of those is freedom of religion. If that be the case, why then should they participate, especially when June and Jane could have gone down the street to another cake baker and gotten a cake baked? Now, it's not like the Aaron and Melissa Klein are out there beating these people over the head and saying, cease and desist at once. We're going to barge into your house and drag you both from bed and force you to live chaste lives. That's not happening. And yet Lefty can't help himself or herself We have to have Lefty going out there and intimidating people for holding religious beliefs that people have held for the last 2,000 years. They were in court yesterday, and Aaron Klein had this to say, but now we're finally in a courtroom where the Constitution and due process can be argued on a level we haven't seen before. I'm looking forward to seeing the outcome. He points out that they've been in administrative hearings prior. And even though they live in Oregon, which is controlled by a bunch of Marxist Leninists and a governor who is, I don't know. I mean, some people out there would use an opinion and say that her practices are perverted from at least a traditional standpoint. Others would say she should be free in a country that allows liberty to do as she pleases, and I follow that, even though I don't agree with her lifestyle. What you've got going on is a government there, though, that is trying to oppress Christians for, again, holding beliefs that are 2,000 years old. Then if you take the Judeo part of that in there, that are 6,000 years old. After the court hearing, while speaking to reporters, Melissa Klein had an emotional response. We lost everything. I loved my shop, and losing it has been so hard for me and my family. You would think that the homosexuals who think that we should be tolerant and have some compassion might have a little for the Kleins. We're down to the stretch run, about 20 minutes to go this week on the program. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What the left doesn't want to hear in this argument, we were talking about these cake bakers a moment ago from the Kleins from Oregon, who have been told that because they hurt somebody's feelings, now we're trying to enshrine politeness in the law. I don't know. You were a little curt when you talked to your neighbor the other day. We're going to have to put you in jail. The fact of the matter is they don't have to sanction what's going on here. Again, you have in a country, this is the whole idea of a free market, the capitalist system. If somebody doesn't want to do business with you, you can go somewhere else and some other merchant will because, oh, gee, all right, I'll make the money. I'll take your money, sure. And yet we can't let well enough be alone. This is what's really going on here. They keep saying, well, you need to be tolerant of our lifestyle. Okay, I'm not beating you over the head with a baseball bat. Again, I'm not bursting into your house and dragging you out of bed and humiliating you and telling you to live a chaste life. I think it might be good for you if you tried it for a while, but I'm not going to force. I was in, I think it's called the TGIF. It's a restaurant chain in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, some years ago. And I was eating my lunch, and there were two guys. They happened to be a couple. And they were sitting there they were sitting at the bar a few feet away from my table, and they were telling stories and making jokes about a friend of mine. She had run for U.S. Senate. She was actually running. It was a few weeks away from Election Day. Her name was Christine O'Donnell. Christine had been a coworker of mine at WGMD Radio in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware at one time, and we had become fast friends because we shared a lot of our beliefs when it came to religious faith and family and things along those lines. She still is tremendously devoted to her family. She lost her dad a few months ago, and when her mom had cancer, she devoted 2 years of her life to taking care of her mother. I was sitting at my table eating my lunch when I heard these two guys making cracks and wisecracks about her, and the bartender, of course, who was, 22 years old and didn't know a thing about politics. Ha, 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 ha. Yeah, because whatever the late-night comedians tell us has got to be true. Ha, 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 ha. And I said to these guys, I said, Christine's a friend of mine. And, she's not here to defend herself, and I think that perhaps your nastiness is a little bit overboard. And then one of them says, well, she's not going to come into my house and tell me how to live. And I said, what are you, about 6 feet tall? And he said, yes. And I said, she's about 5 feet too. How is she going to come barging into your house and force you to live that way? And this guy just looked at me and he didn't have an answer. But that's the thing. It isn't about tolerance. No one is coming around and bursting into your home and dragging you. And this goes back to a case in Texas in the mid-1990s where two men, Texas had an old sodomy law on the books. So the cops went over and they burst into this house and arrested these two guys for breaking the law. And the argument was the cops did it just to humiliate them, which would be terribly wrong if that happened. I think what really happened, though, was somebody in the neighborhood complained, so the police acted on the complaint. And the case went to court, and even Justice Scalia, the great originalist who passed away a year ago last month, Even he said, we can't be doing this. This is not government's area. So leave people alone. We may not agree with how they live, but leave them alone. That was the notion that the founding fathers had. We don't want government telling people what to do in their lives. The Constitution is a list of things the government cannot do to you. It is not a list of things you must do to appease the government or your neighbors. So what you had, and again, the Constitution is about the government and what it can't do. It's not about you. So all of these public accommodation laws that have been created over the last 60 years, you have a choice. Your liberty says if you don't want to do business with someone, then that's your right. Government has expanded that now to forcing you to do things against your own will, and now you have people in certain minority communities who claim that they want you to be tolerant, but they're not tolerant of your beliefs. What they really want to do, and this is what I'm getting at here this morning. It's 9:45. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're now up at the freezing point. It's 32. They want you to participate. What they're trying to do is when they come in and say, I want you to take my wedding photographs, or I want you to come by and bake the cake for my wedding, or serve us pizza from your catering business. Who has pizza at a wedding? I don't know, but that was one of the other infamous cases the last few years. If they're asking you to participate in all of those things, what are they going to ask you to participate in next? I think that the phrase is, depending on whatever translation you're using at your church, bring them out so that we may know them. That was a very chilling comment. What it means is they want someday for you to come participate in their activities, which is why they believe that men who think they are women should be allowed to use the ladies' room or the women's locker room, because they want you to participate. They want you to join in the bacchanalia. Now, if you are a strict believer in the Bible, there were a couple of cities that were destroyed for this type of behavior because it upset God. You had people who God he took them out in Acts, which is a much more modern book. He took them out because they were apparently tithing and lied about what they were tithing and claimed they'd given all they could when that wasn't true. So this notion that it all changed with a new covenant, I don't necessarily believe that. I read a good piece the other day, and it said Jesus wasn't angry with the Pharisees because they were strict about their faith. He was angry with them because they were hypocritical at times. But being strict in your observance wasn't what upset him. And if you're a Christian, you believe as well that Unitarians don't. But if you're most Christian denominations, you believe he's God incarnate, that was God who came down and lived as a man on earth. And your liberal friends don't understand this. They don't have that background, the ability to understand that. So they, according to what they know, what little they know about your faith, is that your faith says, I'm okay, you're okay, and you should make me feel better all the time. And if you don't approve of what I'm doing, then you're going to make Jesus mad. That's the liberal interpretation of it. So if you don't participate by baking the cake or taking the wedding photographs for them or coming over and climbing into bed after the ceremony, which is the next step they want to force you to do, then according to them, you're going to make God angry. Even though they haven't read the book and even though you know better. So this is the direction we're going in this country if this continues. And this is why President Trump, if we'd like to continue our traditional ways and our values in this country and the traditions that we should be allowed to live our lives as we see fit without government interference or the interference of a neighbor, the real threat isn't coming from Christians. The real threat is coming from that LGBT community. We're 10 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 31. Telephone number, if you'd like to reach our program today, 736-0300, 736-0300. My head is still spinning from a reporter a couple of years ago, and I don't expect anyone to remember what I said 2 years ago because I don't script this show and we don't have rewind gears in our brains. It's not in print. But there was a reporter a couple of years ago when Scott Walker had decided he was going to run for president, and he didn't last long in the Republican primaries. Scott Walker is the son of a Baptist minister. Some of you may know that. Scott Walker was asked by a reporter whether he was going to run or not, and he said, well, I have to talk to God about it first. In other words, I had to go home and pray, which is what Christians do. Some liberal reporter mocked him and said in his story, Scott Walker believes that he can talk to God. Well, yeah, that is true. I was just referencing Jesus and his criticism of the hypocrites. And remember his instruction to go pray in your inner room. In other words, you can do it privately and you're fine. And this reporter thought he was being rather funny by calling Scott Walker a nutcase who thought that he was speaking to God, until people started emailing this reporter saying, well, I pray too. In fact, I'm instructed to pray. And then the reporter came out and sheepishly said afterwards, gee, I didn't know that Christians believed they could communicate with God. What do you think prayer is? You pray, and then you're supposed to take some time and have some contemplation and get your answer. Well, I'm not hearing voices in my head, and I don't expect to hear voices in my head, albeit I could, because he did some amazing things. He made a braying ass talk. So he could potentially talk to me, and in fact, in the book, it says he did sometimes talk directly to people. So we're not nuts if he actually does speak to us, but there are other ways God reveals himself, right? And we all know this if you're a practicing Christian. But this reporter didn't know that. How can you be that incredibly biblically illiterate in this culture? Have we moved that far away where people have no clue that people do pray? I have to admit, sometimes I have some difficulty when I go to church. There is a group. I used to go to the 10:30 Mass at St. Edward, but I'm up really early. I mean, I'm up early Monday through Friday, so I'm up early on weekends too. I don't want to be. I don't have anywhere to go necessarily at 4 a.m., but I'm up early just because my body's trained to do it. So instead of going to Mass at 10:30, I've been going earlier to the 8:30 the last couple of months. For that reason, I'm up early. I might as well, and then I have the rest of the day ahead of me. But I like to get there sometimes, if I can, half an hour early. I jeopardized that for a while when I first started trying to move my schedule around. But I've been pretty good about getting there about 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was always taught you get there half an hour early for prayer and then for meditation. The problem is there's a group of people who sit next to me, well, a few feet down the pew, in the pew just in front of me and in the pew just to my right, and they think it's a social club. So I try to pray, and then I hear them talking about, the other day I was over at so-and-so, and I remember stopped over there the other night, and you obviously see each other every week. You probably see each other a few times during the week. You probably can go to breakfast afterward. In fact, we have a coffee hour every week afterward, after being the key. But if you want to socialize, then why bother to come to church in the first place? Just go over to Depot Grill and have your conversation over coffee at your breakfast. There are other people in there who are actually trying to communicate with God through prayer and do those things. Why do I have to listen to your social hour? And you've been instructed already not to do that, and yet so many of them, and it's the same group every week. And I'm getting to the point, and I don't know if this would be Christian or not, but I'd like to get up, walk down, and say, hey, Depot Grill's just down the street. Go have your breakfast and kibitz there. But can you leave the rest of us alone? 9:54, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 34. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, I just heard you say that you didn't know if it would be Christian or not to go down and kind of jump. You didn't use the word jump on, but that's what I'm using, jump on these people. And really, Bill, it wouldn't be Christian. So don't be a hypocrite, okay?
I thank you. I haven't done it, but it crosses my mind, and I'm sure that there's a great episode of The Simpsons I remember seeing a few years ago, where Ned Flanders, who plays the Christian neighbor, I had a friend who thought he said, "I don't like the show because they make fun of Flanders because he's a Christian." Actually, in the show, all the good stuff that happens to Flanders is probably because he's so faithful, and Homer can never understand why life works out for Flanders, but not for him. But Homer did something, and Ned Flanders stood there, and you hear the thoughts going through his head of what he'd like to do in response. But then you hear Ned say, "Oh, no, I can't do that." So he realizes he's got to behave himself, and this is the cross you've got to bear. If you've got an ornery neighbor, you just have to learn to put up with it. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Hey, Bill. I just wanted your thoughts on, you know, Trump's got a lot of things on his plate, and he's trying to get a lot of things done. But the deficit and the debt. You think he's going to be addressing that? I mean, 20 trillion in debt, and he wants the $1 trillion, stimulus package, and
The Washington Examiner had a lead editorial today. It's a conservative publication, and the writer said if he can restore some economic growth, that his budget actually makes sense. That even though he's talking about a big, huge stimulus package to fix roads, bridges, and airports, if he can find a way through deregulation to increase even by a percentage point the GDP growth over a year, that will bring in enough revenue that it will more than cover and may even leave him with a budget surplus. Key there being if we see the economic growth.
yeah. Do you think he'll do any budget cutting? I mean, I think that's something we have to do. I mean, even if even in that, Sean Hannity talks about the penny plan, 1% off of, across the board.
Well, when he talked about cutting out foreign aid, I thought that was a good place to start. The problem is that Lindsey Graham and all of these guys who think that America's still got to be the policeman of the world object and say it will never happen. I'd prefer that if you can't afford to send your own kid to college and pay your own mortgage and all of those things, and yet we've got to take care of the rest of the world through our high taxes, I don't see that as being very American. I think that Trump he's thinking like his constituents think. The problem is he's going to be going up against Democrats who refuse to do it and even some of his fellow Republicans.
Boy, isn't that the truth?
Yeah. Ronald Reagan faced the same challenge and he didn't win. Remember that. Reagan was never able to overcome the opposition in his own party as well as among the Democrats.
It might be different now. I mean, we're pretty pissed off at our own Republicans. I'm so angry with them.
I know the feeling. I thank you very much for the telephone call. They remind me a lot of those people I sit near in church. Coming up on 10 o'clock this morning, we have news from Fox, Rush Limbaugh's program in just a few minutes. He's on the air, of course, between 10 and 1 o'clock Mountain Time, followed by Sean Hannity. The news at 1 o'clock. Sean Hannity's up. Glenn Beck between 4 and 7, and Dave Ramsey tonight. God willing, if the creek don't rise, they'll allow me to come back and do this all over again on Monday morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe.